New York's Attica prison, the story behind America's most infamous lockdown. Before we dive into the truth behind Attica's darkest lockdown, hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss the stories that America tries to forget. The screen fades into the sound of sirens. Not the loud, panicked kind, these were controlled, rhythmic, and terrifying in their precision. The kind used only when the situation inside a prison has reached a point where every second counts. On a frigid October night, the lights of Attica Correctional Facility glowed an eerie blue against the fog hanging low over western New York. Officers moved in tight formation across the yard, radios crackling, boots striking wet pavement. What began as a routine inmate count had turned into something far more unsettling. At 11:42 p.m., a guard named Daniel Mercer activated the emergency alarm after discovering that one of the cell blocks, A block, was completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. No footsteps. No shouting. None of the restless noise that typically echoed through steel corridors built to contain over 1,000 high-security inmates. When Mercer looked through the narrow, reinforced glass into the block, he froze. Every inmate was standing inside their cell, facing the wall. Motionless. As if waiting for a signal. It felt coordinated. And nothing at Attica was ever coordinated unless someone inside was pulling strings. Within minutes, the facility's response unit swept the block. The prisoners didn't resist. They didn't move. Not until the officers reached cell 14, a cell belonging to Leo Durant, an inmate with a reputation for being clever, patient, and dangerously influential. The door to Durant's cell was wide open. And Durant was gone. That discovery set off a full-scale lockdown. Gates slammed shut. Perimeters sealed. Floodlights snapped on. No one knew how an inmate like Durant could vanish without triggering alarms. But what worried the investigators more was the possibility that he had help from the inside. Detective Elise Carter from the New York State Task Force arrived shortly after midnight. Calm, observant, and relentless, she had handled complex cases before. But even she felt something different in the air that night, like the walls of the prison were holding secrets that had been building pressure for years. She began her investigation with the control room logs. The entry for Durant's cell showed nothing unusual. But the camera feed for A block between 11:18 p.m. and 11:27 p.m. was missing. Not corrupted. Not glitched. Missing. Someone had deleted it. Precisely. Cleanly. Confidently. Carter interviewed the guards, but their statements didn't align. One claimed he saw Durant during count. Another said he hadn't seen him all shift. A rookie officer admitted he heard whispers about a deal happening among certain inmates, but he didn't know what it meant. The deeper Carter looked, the more the pieces refused to fit. Durant wasn't the kind of man who simply escaped. He planned. He calculated. He maneuvered people the way others moved chess pieces. And then, as officers swept the outer yard, someone noticed fresh footprints leading toward an old service tunnel sealed off years earlier. But the steel cover to that tunnel had been unlocked from the inside. When they lifted it, a faint draft rose from the darkness below, cold, sharp, and carrying the scent of something long undisturbed. Inside, just inches beneath the surface, investigators found a small metal container with Durant's initials scratched into the lid. And what was inside that box changed the direction of the entire investigation. The tunnel, the box, and the betrayal inside Attica. Detective Elise Carter held the metal container carefully, its worn edges cold beneath her fingers. Officers crowded around as she lifted the lid. Inside was a strip of folded paper and an old brass key, dull with age but still heavy with purpose. The paper contained only 3 words, written in sharp, deliberate strokes. He made a deal. Carter stared at the message, her mind racing. The handwriting didn't match Durant's. She had reviewed his file, studied his old letters, examined every detail from former cases linked to his name. This was written by someone else, someone who wanted her to believe Durant wasn't acting alone. More troubling was the key. Carter recognized it instantly. It belonged to the administrative wing, 1 floor above the warden's office. A place inmates had no business having access to. Someone with authority had given it to him. As lockdown tightened, Attica felt less like a prison and more like a pressure cooker. Guards whispered in corners. Radios buzzed with half-finished reports. A storm was forming inside the walls, and everyone knew it. Carter moved to the administrative wing to match the key. It fit perfectly into the lock of a small, outdated office no longer in use. When she stepped inside, dust clung to her boots. The air smelled of old paper and forgotten secrets. On the desk sat a ledger. A thin, unremarkable book until she opened it. Rows and rows of names filled the pages. Some were crossed out. Some were marked with symbols. And several had notes beside them, dates, times, and phrases like transfer delayed or unit rotation approved. But then Carter saw Durant's name. Next to it was a notation, priority clearance approved by Harrison. Warden Michael Harrison. A man who had spent years building an image of discipline and integrity. A man who had been praised for reducing violence inside the facility. A man who insisted on being involved in every critical decision. A man who, at that moment, stepped into the office doorway behind her. "Detective Carter," he said, voice calm but edged. "You're searching areas that weren't part of the investigation directive." Carter kept one hand on the ledger, the other near her pocket where she'd slipped the brass key. "This office was opened with a key found in a tunnel tied to an escaped inmate," she replied. "I'm following where the evidence leads." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Durant isn't escaped. He's hiding. And we don't need confusion right now. We need order." Something in his tone made Carter uneasy. Too controlled. Too practiced. Before she could press further, an officer burst into the hallway. "Detective, you need to see this. It's urgent." Carter followed him back to the control room. The entire staff was gathered around a monitor. The missing footage, the 9-minute gap, had reappeared. But it wasn't restored. Someone had re-uploaded it. The video showed Durant entering A block at 11:18 p.m. Then, he stopped, looked up, and spoke to someone standing just outside the camera's reach. A shadow. Broad-shouldered. Wearing a guard's uniform. Carter leaned forward as the shadow stepped into frame, just enough to reveal part of a name tag. "Ha!" Static cut in. Then the footage ended abruptly. Carter's pulse hammered. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But every instinct told her she had just seen proof of something larger than an escape. Something that could rip Attica open from the inside. And then a second video file appeared on the screen. Dated 1 hour earlier. "The Truth Beneath Attica." Detective Elise Carter stared at the screen, the title chapter 3 glowing coldly from the control room monitor. Prison staff murmured nervously. Nobody knew who uploaded the first clip, now there was a second, waiting like a trap. Carter inhaled slowly. "Play it." The video began with no sound, just the grainy view of a storage corridor deep beneath Attica. A place used decades ago, now sealed off and ignored. The timestamp showed 10:13 p.m., almost an hour before Durant vanished. Durant stepped into frame, escorted by the same shadowed guard from the previous footage. His hands weren't cuffed. He wasn't resisting. Instead, he walked calmly, like a man who knew exactly where he was supposed to be. The guard opened a rusted metal door. Durant moved inside. But before the camera cut off, the guard turned slightly. Enough for the name tag to become clear for a single frozen second. Harrison. The room fell silent. Carter felt the truth settle into place, heavy and undeniable. Warden Michael Harrison hadn't lost control of Attica. He had been quietly shaping events from inside the very walls he claimed to protect. But why? She turned, but Harrison was gone. Officers searched the hallway, the offices, the stairwell. Nothing. It was as if he vanished the moment the footage exposed him. Carter ordered all gates secured. "Find him. Now." Minutes later, a call came from the lower level, an old mechanical room beneath the administration wing. "Detective, we found him." Carter descended the narrow stairs, the air turning colder with every step. Inside the room, Harrison stood alone, hands resting on a file cabinet. He didn't run. He didn't struggle. He simply looked tired. "You weren't supposed to see that footage," he said softly. Carter approached him carefully. Why did you help Durant? What were you planning? Harrison exhaled, the weight of years pressing down on him. Durant wasn't escaping. He was exposing something. Carter frowned. What? Harrison nodded toward a stack of old files. Corruption. Deals made long before I became warden. Transfers arranged in exchange for money, favors, silence. Durant found evidence. Evidence that implicated people who still work here. People with influence beyond this prison. Carter scanned the files, recognizing some of the names, contractors, officers, administrators. A network. A quiet machine operating behind the scenes, steering inmates like currency. Durant came to me weeks ago, Harrison continued. He wanted to bring it to the state, but he didn't trust anyone else. I agreed to help him, but someone got suspicious. I knew the only way to keep him safe was to stage something dramatic. Carter stared at him, trying to piece the story together. So you orchestrated the lockdown? Yes, Harrison whispered. I needed time to get him out. I needed time to finish what we started. Before Carter could respond, another officer ran into the room. Detective, we found Durant. The room tensed. Where? Carter asked. The officer hesitated. Outside the north perimeter. Sitting by the service road. He's just waiting. Carter left Harrison with security and headed above ground. The wind cut sharp as she stepped into the floodlights. Durant sat calmly on the curb, hands folded, as if he had been expecting her. You saw the files, he said quietly. Carter nodded. The investigation won't be easy. Durant's expression didn't change. Truth never is. Officers approached to take him into custody, but Durant looked at Carter one last time. The difference between a prison and the world outside, he said, is that out there, people pretend they're free. Carter watched as he was escorted away, the storm above Attica finally breaking into cold rain. The case wasn't solved. Not really. If anything, it had only begun. The system behind the walls was larger than one inmate, one warden, or one night of chaos. And as she walked back toward the facility, she felt a chilling certainty settle over her. Attica wasn't hiding a single crime. It was hiding an entire history. If you thought this story was intense, her voice echoed in the narrator's tone, just wait until you hear what was uncovered next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.